Oh, wouldn't it be nice if only we could just hit women?
Cast Iron Brains, a podcast with an abiding commitment to always delivering to our audience the emotional truths that comport with our preconceived notions about the world, while at the same time aggrandizing ourselves in the most unfalsifiable way possible, while also flattering the moral sensibilities of our audience. A podcast whose podcast Arnold Palmer is 70% emotional truth, 25% overblown blowhardiness played for laughs, and 5% crushing melancholic gloom and ennui. My name is Bob, sitting across the way from my good friend and co-host. That's Abe. How you doing tonight, Abe?
Doing well, Bob.
Yeah, here we are. Lori's here too. How you doing tonight, Lori?
I'm fine.
Lori's fine. Tonight is Tuesday, September the 19th, 2023. Marking 64 years since the entry of my mother into the world. Happy birthday, Mom.
Oh, look at that.
Just remembered at the last second tonight to send her some well wishes. I will acknowledge here in this forum, because I'm not great at communicating here in our bogus future, as I'm sure my wife would attest. Abe, did you have a good weekend?
Yes, I did. No one's birthday on my end, but it was a lot of fun. Just hung out with some friends. Went to a show. I'll mention it at the end. Went to a live show instead of like a movie.
A tease for later. Stick around for a couple of hours, everybody. Find out where Abe was this weekend.
Or skip to the end of the podcast.
That's
true.
Right.
Let your fingers do the walking over to that little slidey bar. Because I know everybody comes. I mean, everybody, nobody's here for the blowhard reactions to the news of the week. They want to know what movies Abe went to last week and whether or not it was a movie, which is the entire depth of the review that he often gives. We weren't here last night. It's a Tuesday. Sort of going to be, I think, possibly our new plan is to record on Tuesdays.
Much better for me.
Oh, well, there you go.
Wasn't great for me tonight. We had a PTO meeting, and
no, but you have very little going on in your life, so
the more
much easier for me on Tuesdays.
I don't know how much I want to talk about the PTO situation or how wise it would be. Like the reason not to talk about it is that, first of all, you don't want to talk about those sorts of specifics, like in this sort of semi-public situation where we're in here. But also, like, if anybody was mad at me and found out about, like, mad at me related to my involvement with the PTO and then found out about the podcast, like, it would just be the end of my relationship or my position on the PTO board. Like, it's me being outed as the host of this podcast is not a survivable event.
Oh, yeah? Just because you are on the podcast, or because they're going to find something that you said at some point? Because, like, who's going to sift through countless hours?
This is episode 159, I think.
Said some truly awful things.
Right, but somebody has to go through the trouble to, like, listen to all of it.
That's
right?
true.
That's like
they would have to listen.
That would be so boring.
They would have to listen to, like... It doesn't take long for me to say something that would offend the sensibilities of the people who are seeking offense, right? Like, I don't think it would be that hard.
Right. But, I mean, again, still, it's our protective coating, just to tire people out to where, like, fuck it, I'm not going to find anything.
So, obviously, I'm not going to talk about the PTO. So, any prying ears, just don't bother. You can just go away now, because we're definitely not going to talk about my frustration with the PTO in the next few minutes. So you could just...
Yeah, I can just skip to the movie.
You could just skip ahead
skip to the movie part at the end. About hour 45, hour 50 in, you hear Abe...
That's what I do.
...talk about the cartoons that he's been watching. All right, so there's a Chick-fil-A situation, you'll recall, from 2012, with the gays, right?
Yes.
Like
Was there a story that came out? What happened? How did people become aware that they were donating to causes that people didn't agree with?
I think someone just looked. I think they
Okay.
brag about it on their... I remember eating at a Chick-fil-A after hearing, like, Chick-fil-A's mean to gays.
Right.
And I remember seeing, like, we donate to this family-friendly thing. And it's like, all it takes is for you to look into that charity.
So, like, one more step.
To see...
All right.
Yeah,
Okay.
yes, one more step.
Okay.
right, we donate to this family-friendly charity. And then you go to the family-friendly charity, and it's like, are you tired of your homosexual children being all gay? Send them to us. We're going to camp the gay right on out of them. Like, not
And if
good,
we-
right? Like, there's basically no defending it. The Chick-fil-A Foundation, whatever it was back then, I forget the name of it, but like S. Truett Cathy, who's the founder, and Dan Cathy, who's the founder's son, were using their foundation to direct monies towards negative, like people who were very much opposed to the lifestyle, as it were, however you want to phrase it, and not in any sort of like, not in a way that's defensible to most people in the current day and age, including like conversion therapy nonsense and other things like that. And they were rightly at the time castigated for their connection to those things. And arguably, a sort of great moral outrage worked. They stopped sending money to those particular charities. Right. They stopped bragging about it anyway. I think it's like the Winship or Winstead Foundation. I had Googled that up real quick. Winshape. And I was nearly there. Oh. It was the Winshape Foundation, and they were directing their money to bad things. And as of 2012, 2013 or so, they had sort of announced that they were going to try to do better. And then in 2019, they got in trouble again because information was released that they had been donating to the Salvation Army and to the Fellowship for Christian Athletes, that they had multi-year agreements with those two organizations, which people, then you have to start doing the dot connecting to get upset about them, right. Those organizations from that same point of view.
Bob knows all about the Fellowship of Christian Athletes.
Right. I was, whatever. We don't have to go into my personal history with the FCA, but...
It's pertinent, but you don't have to get into it.
The FCA and the Salvation Army have been known to, the Salvation Army is a Catholic organization. The FCA is something closer to it's not Catholic by any means. It's some sort of, new Christian softcore rock and roll kind of organization that wants to help build leadership in schools or whatever. But like they had gotten in trouble because they were asking kids to take purity pledges and to declare like that sort of shit.
Right.
And,
but real quick, just for context, this is not like Burger King. Chick-fil-A, their whole angle is religious from the get-go, right? They take Sundays off because God took that day off or something.
No, it's to spend time with your family and go to church. It's so their employees
right.
had so that no one had to work on Sunday, so that they would go to church.
Right, but that suggests that they are. The donations that they're making to these causes it's not coming out of left field. It's like they're religious-based kind of angle, and they're supporting religious-based charities, and some of that money is used for things that people don't approve of.
Right. Anyway, the 2019 charity or controversy comes because of those two organizations, and Chick-fil-A says, look, these were long-standing partnerships. We had multi-year commitments, and we're no longer going to be donating money to even those organizations going forward. And they released some corporate gobbledygook about how we're just going to focus on like education and feeding the hungry and that sort of thing moving forward. And like they wash their hands. And there's nothing that they can do ultimately about the fact that Dan Cathy remains a seemingly sincere Christian in his beliefs. And he, to some extent, every time you order a tray of Chick-fil-A nuggets or get a sandwich from there, you're enriching Dan Cathy in some small 1/10 of 1% sort of way. And in that sense, you're contributing maybe to a worldview that you don't agree with. To which I would issue the challenge that if that is going to be your standard for how you interact with the world around you, you are going to always fail to live up to that standard. Whatever. The point is, Chick-fil-A is no longer making a point of sending their charitable donations in the direction of things that got them in trouble before. They've moved on from that. It remains sort of a meme in certain circles, right? And people who believe themselves to be acting in allyship with the LGBTQ plus community, people still find it unseemly to interact with Chick-fil-A in any way. I know people who won't eat at Chick-fil-A because of their past associations with these bad charities, which is a long set-up way of saying that the PTO that I'm a part of is running a fundraiser, one of many fundraisers, where you go if on one particular night, if parents in our area go to the Chick-fil-A and they say, look, we are with this school and it's that school's spirit night, Chick-fil-A will donate 15% of the proceeds from the parents who show up and say the magic words back to the parent-teacher organization, right? So we might make $50 or something. Like if we're lucky, we're going to make a small pile of money because a handful of families will have gotten dinner at Chick-fil-A that night. Again, this is one of currently a half a dozen things on the PTO calendar of ways in which we are raising money with different businesses and different things that we're doing around town. This upset, when it was announced, this somewhat predictably in our progressive little college town, upset some folks who raised an objection to us associating with or associating the school with the evil chicken company. Never mind the fact that it's no longer the case that Chick-fil-A does the bad thing anymore, right? Like it sort of doesn't matter, and I recognize that it's a symbol of something to these people that they simply cannot get past. But it's weird to me to insist that everyone else also should not be able to get past it. Like it's a strange thing to insist that. And then, of course, like the pushback is, why don't you just do it with some other business? Well, it's like, well, because this business makes it super easy for us to do it, and people fucking love this restaurant. I don't know if you noticed, but like they do $20 billion in revenue
on 6 days of business too.
On 6 days of business, in terms of per store dollars, they blow away, I think, every other fast food restaurant on the planet, just in terms of the amount of revenue that they're able to generate per location. So like they're in the top 25 in terms of revenue generated, right. But in terms of revenue per store, they're in the top like 3 or 4. Right. Like they make a ton of money on a relatively small amount of stores compared to like Subway or McDonald's or whatever. Like, and you can't even get in the fucking drive-through line or at dinner time around here. Like It's wrapped around the building twice. It's crazy how busy they are all the time.
And you get in the drive-through line wrapped around the door, you're still out in 15 minutes.
Right. Yeah, they run a well-oiled machine. Actually, where I live, they built one like a stone's throw away from me now, and like anytime Chick-fil-A is open, it's not Sunday or anything like that, I never see it where it's like empty. It always seems like there's a lot of activity, but you're right, Lori, they get you through pretty quickly.
They get you through. It's one of my favorite YouTube videos. I'll send it later because it's not pertinent, but I love it.
Bob, quick question, just for some context, like was there some other partner the school used in the past that's different than Chick-fil-A? Is there something unique about this year with Chick-fil-A?
I think this is the first year that we've done a Chick-fil-A fundraiser.
I mean, obviously.
I mean, whatever. It's not like it was a big pushback. We got one email from one teacher who was not pleased with the association, and like we didn't like there was a feeling of should we just cancel it or should we go through with it, and like what are our actual options here? Because the problem is that when you say, why don't you, because when the response is, why don't you just go with literally anyone else instead of this, which is only going to cause potential harm to people, how do you respond to that in a way that doesn't make you seem like a callous monster? And like it's such a shitty way, and there's nothing wrong with voicing your opposition to something that you feel passionate about, right? I understand that, but like you leave the opposition or the people on the PTO board in a no-win situation where a response to you that comports with that recognizes your feelings and says, you're right, we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings here, which we obviously don't. We don't want to make anyone feel like they can't participate in something that benefits the whole community in the way that bringing in money for the PTO sort of does. That are bad, and we'll just cancel the thing. I think that makes a fundamental mistake if that had been our response about what is and is not political, right? And right. To cancel that fundraiser would be a political act in the eyes of a whole bunch of other people who hadn't even considered Chick-fil-A and spending $1 there on a moral plane at all, right? Like it just doesn't occur to them that where you bought your fried chicken dinner has anything to do with your personal morality in a way that matters in the world, right? And to insist that the PTO publicly cancel, which they didn't do, to be fair, they're sort of asking us to, but it's not like there was an insistence. There were fucking boycotts. There was no picketing.
Also, like, I appreciate that this person wrote an email to you and not like a public, how dare they.
Right.
You know, like I feel like these days a very normal response would have been a more public, I can't believe that your PTO is doing this,
right,
rather than a calm, collected email to the entity they have a problem with.
Right. And we responded, I think, professionally and courteously and with a great deal of respect, and acknowledged the feeling of the person while at the same time, like, this is what we're doing. We did this, and we're not going to not do it. And I didn't include, like, and for the record, like, they stopped doing this years ago. Like, they no longer give money to quote-unquote hate groups, if that's what you believe they were doing back then. It's simply not true that is how that corporation continues to present itself in the world. And the fact that it once did seems obvious to me that whatever price they were going to pay, they have paid already. And that, ironically, of course, the price was the opposite, right? Because this became a rallying cry for the worst people on the planet to go have Chick-fil-A night from the local church group or whatever, right? Like Mike Huckabee is getting on his Fox program and saying, meet me at the Chick-fil-A for Chick-fil-A night, because they give money to these organizations that we actually believe in, and let's not have them be bullied or whatever. Like, that's not what we're trying to do here. It's just, I understand. And to some extent, I can appreciate the instinct to say what you really think and try to make your voice heard. But at the same time, like, it's just, I've never understood this desire to, because ultimately it comes down to a question of, like, how much can you control what happens to your dollar once it leaves your pocket? And if you really want to play that game, I seriously don't understand how you can comport yourself to that standard in the world at all, ever. Like, I don't know how you can be in the world.
Right. You know, Bob, I do have a couple of questions. So I always, like, whenever somebody makes a case about something, I always kind of take what they're saying at face value, right? So, like, back then, people had a problem with what Chick-fil-A did. You mentioned 2 occasions where they were caught up doing something that people didn't approve of, right? So the people who are today, like in 2023, still hold the view that money should not be sent their way because despite what they say, they may be still funneling money to something I don't agree with, right? So, like, you know, what is their thinking of, like, what seems to me like open-ended punishment, right? Like, you know, so, like, Mike Tyson was accused of doing some sort of sexual assault to somebody. He was found guilty. He went to jail 3 years. He comes back Muslim. And then, you know, he goes on with his life. And people, you know, you see him everywhere now, right? He's part of just general society, right? There's no, like, boycott Mike Tyson.
He's cuddly grandpa pigeon-loving Mike Tyson at this point, yeah.
Right. So, like, whenever there's a structure around something
He's
like...
living O.J. Simpson's best life.
Right, yeah, and that's true. Well, yeah, that is true. But, like, so, like, whenever there's some sort of structure to the punishment, people seem to be like, okay, they paid whatever, and now we shouldn't have this drip, blacklisting kind of thing, right? But when it comes to something like this, maybe people think that, they didn't actually suffer any consequence for their actions, right? Because like you said, there was this counter push and their sales, I think, like even ticked up for a little bit, didn't it? Like it didn't impact their bottom line. So maybe that's why people still harbor this sort of resentment to this day. But like sometimes I think like, whatever you believe about something, like come up with some sort of punishment, and then like it should be something finite, right? Because like, is the idea just to blacklist Chick-fil-A forever? Or
because it's not anything related to the current reality. It's just a symbolic act. These people became a symbol of LGBTQ hate, and therefore any association with them moving forward is signaling your support for that mindset, is the decision that these people have made. And like, okay, if that's where you want to direct your energy, then I guess by all means. If you think that that is a meaningful and morally relevant act in the world, then by all means. But to apply that same morality to anyone else outside of you strikes me as sort of not okay.
Right.
Like we live in a pluralistic world where you don't have to necessarily agree with anything that Chick-fil-A once supported or didn't support. To me, it should have no bearing on how you imagine other people should or should not comport themselves in the world. Like, I don't know. I think that it's summed up in this notion of the symbolic act, that these people have decided that any dollar sent to Chick-fil-A is somehow another bullet fired in the culture war. When like I don't know how you live in the world if that's the way that you see things. I sincerely don't.
What's interesting is that the only way, because it is a unsustainable way to go, but like the only way you can function is to not look into any other company, right? Because if you did if you went on a fact-finding mission on every product you have, any food you have, you're gonna find some things that you disagree with, right? So like you're gonna start making more of these choices. Like I think, maybe you're right. Maybe it is. It's like you can't unring the bell. Like Chick-fil-A is forever associated to be on that side, and so like there's nothing really they could do. But you couldn't apply that standard to every other thing that you consume or you buy.
To say nothing of the fact that if we're looking to figure things out in terms of harm, like the amount of harm that Chick-fil-A did to the LGBTQ community in the sending of however much money they sent to those charities, which did work, that took that money and then did work that fulfilled their mission of trying to eradicate gays or whatever, or to convert gay children or whatever the plan was.
Right.
And I'm not downplaying the sort of harm that can be done psychologically to a person who has to endure that sort of thing, or has to grow up in a world where their parents don't fucking think that they are the way that they ought to be. Like, that's a real bummer. Right. But those people exist. They've always existed. They will continue to exist. But that's not really the point that I'm making. The point is that I've forgotten the point that I was making naturally. The harm done by them giving money back in 2012 to the gay conversion centers, and the harm done by them giving money to the FCA and the Salvation Army, which, by the way, I think is probably minimal compared to whatever harm was done in 2012 and before that, absolutely pales in comparison to the harm done by filling people with fried chicken and waffle fries and ice cream multiple times a day for years and years and years, right? Like, it's not even close. Like, it is bad. The food is bad for you because they're huge calorie bombs full of salt and saturated fats that cause heart disease and possibly cancer on the long run, right? Like if you're looking for a moral actor here, I can assure you that as you're going down the 5-6 lane Strode in your little suburb there, that the Chick-fil-A and the McDonald's and the Zaxby's and the Raising Cane's and the Popeyes and the KFC and the fucking Domino's and the Mexican restaurant, there's no moral heroes here in terms of what they're doing to the population. But because they've become this symbol, or briefly became this symbol of sort of Christian conservative corporation garbage a decade ago, they have to live with that to a certain extent. And I understand that. It's going to loom large in people's minds for a long time. I just don't know. I don't know what it accomplishes to continue holding on to something like that. I mean, the change happened, right? Like, you won the fight. They stopped donating to the organizations that you were upset about them donating to. You won. I don't know what going on about it at this point accomplishes.
And they didn't need to.
Right.
They could have continued to do it.
Yeah, it's not like Bud Light where they lost money. They were doing just fine. Yeah, you're right, Laura. They could have just continued to just dole out money to whomever.
Right. This is a front in the culture war that you won.
Nice.
Chick-fil-A retreated from that front in the culture war. They said, we would rather sell fried chicken to the maximum number of people without causing this sort of harm to our brand, right? This weird psychological thing that doesn't actually exist. But we don't want to harm that entity as we hope to go from 2,500 restaurants that we had in 2012 to whatever the number, 4,500 now, to someday like 10,000 restaurants or something, like whatever the goal is. And by the way, for what it's worth, as silly as this conversation is, out of all of them, in terms of the franchise model, which is a fucking, can often be this really awful way of conducting business, Chick-fil-A doesn't allow people to scoop up 30, 40, 50, 60 restaurants and that's
why their service is so good.
And then funnel all of the profits to one asshole who owns all of these restaurants in a region or something like that. These are owner-operator stores where the person who owns the place has to spend time on the floor in the store all of the time and doesn't pull out millions of dollars in profit from these places. They make a very healthy living, far more healthy living than their employees do, certainly. But that's a function of the labor model.
But if their employees are just doing what pleasures them, so
yeah.
Also,
anyway,
there's no shortage of staff. Anytime you go to Chick-fil-A, there's always like sufficient number of people to do whatever.
They are the only ones that through this pandemic, when every other fast food restaurant was having trouble staffing, Chick-fil-A was doing just fine.
Right.
Yeah, and I don't fucking care. Like, I don't want to defend Chick-fil-A. I don't care to defend Chick-fil-A in any way. What I think matters is that people should be permitted to go about their lives doing the normal activities of interacting with the world around them without suffering from the sort of crushing feeling that every act that I do is weighted with this somebody else's moralism, right? Like it's just not any of your business to apply those sorts of things, like unless there's a great and obvious crime happening, yes. Right? And so, yeah, when you see what you saw in 2012, by all means, do the thing. Accept the victory. It's sort of it's something that you ask out of a lot of these activist groups, which is you got the thing that you wanted. Why does it continue at this point? To say nothing of the fact that I spent like a great deal of time and effort in these stupid PTO emails. My job is as communications guy.
It's not a job.
No, it's not a job.
It's a role.
The role is to write the goddamn emails for the PTO. And so I put a lot of effort into it, and they make them funny and interesting and good, and they're full of jokes. And
he's gotten a lot of good feedback.
Except tonight I got feedback from someone who brought up the Chick-fil-A thing first as not the sort of thing that we want to be doing in our school community, which, okay, fine, I get it. And then was like, and you have to consider that as cute and as funny as the emails are, there are a lot of non-English speaking people who aren't going to feel included because the Google Translate won't allow the humor to come through. when they stick it in there, going from English to Pashto. Like, you've got to be fucking kidding me.
Come on, that's for real?
100% for real. The concern was that the Afghan refugees would not feel included in the joke, and therefore would be made uncomfortable and wouldn't understand what was going on with the PTO emails. Which, first of all, if they're reading them, great. I'll be happy as best I can to try to use Google Translate myself to see whether or not the jokes are coming through. Just run my email through the Google Bard with the help of Afghan language, and maybe I make some good jokes, which I'm sure they would find hilarious, but our white allies here just horrendously offended by. And speaking of which, let's not ask the Afghan refugees their feelings about the gays, about conversion therapy, about the fucking chicken, right? Should we be asking the Muslims who've arrived from Afghanistan about how their feelings about the homosexual lifestyle? I'm not sure that you'd be so quick to ally yourselves with that particular way of thinking.
This just seems like it's such an out of left field kind of thing to bring up. Like, is this grounded in some sort of conversation he had with somebody who English is not their first language, or he just imagining possible issues?
This is liberal brain rot.
No, they can't speak English to.
Sorry, I don't usually like to talk about things in these terms, but this is just the brain rot of a liberal who means well and has taken 1 or 20 too many inclusivity DEI seminars or something. But like the idea that, like, setting aside the fact that for years nobody read a PTO email from start to finish. Right. Like, it just never fucking happened. Nobody is reading the PTO email from start to finish. You'd have to be a broken-brained person to do that. And I put together, like, just it's just fucking great. You remember my fantasy football recaps from years ago? Those were awesome, right? And you read those, maybe at least first couple paragraphs anyway. These similar. They're grabbing the attention. They're getting people involved. Right. People are excited. They're just throwing money at us for the PTO at this point. And now every single time I write an email for this stupid organization going forward, at the back of my mind is going to be, but what about the poor Afghan refugees who aren't going to get my jokes? Like, I know that concern will be front of mind for some small non-zero number of people who are going to be getting these emails, who will see the email and snidely, and it won't be snide in their heads. They'll be upset on behalf of people who simply do not exist, right? Like, the idea that I should shape the content of the email such that Google Translate will turn it into Pashto in a way. What?
It's Pashto.
I can't say the word. Obviously, I'm not sensitive to these concerns. That's the whole point. Is like, how could you ever construct an English language sentence even that you were confident? Like, the idea that you could convey a complex idea or even a fairly simple idea in such a way that you can plug it into the stupid Google Translate, and you're positive that I'm not positive that an English language sentence is going to turn out in somebody else's brain when it's in English, right? The way that I intended it to. There's like a 60% chance that somebody reads a sentence I wrote in English and their native language is English. They've never spoken another fucking word in any other language, and they're going to think the exact opposite of the thing that I put in the sentence. I've seen it happen many times. And if you want to say that's the fault of the sentence, by all means. But you're fucking wrong, because the sentence was great. So fuck you. But anyway, it's certainly not going to help if I have to further imagine what Google's going to do to it when it puts it into another language. You're out of your mind. What are you talking about?
So you said that, this is kind of like some liberal kind of way of thinking. But, like, I'm going to be less charitable and say, like, it is such an absurd thing to bring up as a consideration. It is such an absurd thing to bring up.
Abe, what you mean to say is, as an immigrant.
I'm going to
and then you keep talking. Yes. Then keep talking.
But it is so absurd that the only logical reason I can think that somebody would bring that up is just to grandstand, to say I'm a more considered person than you. Because, like, to actually take what he's saying and actually apply it in the real world, it would grind everything to a halt. You couldn't do anything because, like, why stop there? Why not have it like in Braille also? Because somebody can't. I mean, like, there are just so many.
They have the speech to text.
Right. Another example of that. But what I'm saying is there are other audiences.
Does the voice of the joke translate into the speech to text
right.
when the stupid robot reads it back to them? No, I'll bet it doesn't. I'll bet that all of the context clues are lost when the robot reads it out loud.
Right. But there's no. I don't think they actually think somebody would actually take the time to do that. They're just saying that. And now that I think of it, I suspect that the whole conversation is for the similar reasons. Like, they're not actually asking for them to take an action because they would try to galvanize some more support if they were trying to do that. They're just like, look, I'm a good person. I'm bringing up these things, like these stupid fucking things that nobody would consider. Like, they're bringing it up because they're a good person. Again, I'm reading into this that this person is less than honest, but maybe that's not accurate for me to say. But, like, to me, like, those two things. I mean, the first one I was going to give him a mulligan. All right, what a stupid idea, but okay. Everybody has those. But that second thing, hey, I know these jokes are funny, but what about somebody from the Pashto region? Like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, that is, you're just saying things.
Do you know how fucking condescending it would be for me to send out a version for English as a second language or non-English speakers? And oh man, it makes me so fucking mad.
I got home. I said, "What's wrong?" You said nothing. You lied to me.
I just don't understand why
bad husband.
Why should we talk down to these people? And, like, in what way does because here's the other end of it, right? Which is that I'm not trying to communicate with everybody when I write these things. Right. That must be stated out loud, and it's an obvious fact that this is when I write these fucking, I don't know how long it was, fucking 2,000 word long email or post about what the PTO is up to this month, the newsletter that I sent out. It's not for everybody. There's no such thing as a thing that is worth consuming that is for everybody. It's just a fact.
Well, especially because you're right, because the emails are for the people who read the emails. And then there's the flyers that are for the people who don't read the emails. And then there's a poster somewhere, like there's different outlets for the same message.
Right. That's a great point, which is that, like, the invitation to the PTO meeting went out.
Taking business classes, Bob.
In a number of different forums, including in a flyer that went home in every kid's book bag twice last week, right? So, like, the word has gotten out in any way that it needs to be gotten out. And then you just throw in the fact that I'm able to communicate with people in a way that is sort of more interesting than they're used to. And, like, they appreciate that fact, or at least some of them do. And then for somebody else to be like, yeah, but think about the dummies, because that's the other end of this. This is not just about the English as a second language or the foreign folks who are here now as refugees. This is a concern about how inclusive are you being for the dummies, because not everybody is going to get all of your jokes. They're not going to understand what's going on. You know what? They didn't show up last year either. Right? They didn't show up the year before that. Nobody fucking showed up. Nobody shows up. You know why? Because when somebody does show up to try and to do a good job and to make a difference, somebody fucking shows up and scolds them for the way that they've decided to try to make that difference. Right. And that's why. Because you show up there too and you try to make them feel dumb. And like that, like, what are you really accomplishing here besides that? Abe, you're familiar with Hasan Minhaj, correct?
Yes. Patriot Act. He was like a correspondent for The Daily Show, and then he had his own show, Patriot Act, that I think lasted 2 seasons. And he's made the rounds. I think he did like
comedian.
A White House Correspondents' Dinner once, like he was the host. Yeah.
During the Trump years, when they stopped inviting Trump, or Trump wasn't going to show anyway.
I think he just didn't show up. I think the invitation was there.
Hasan Minhaj, also the author of 2 Netflix specials, the stand-up comedian of 2 Netflix specials. The King's Jester, I believe, is the more recent one. Homecoming King is the first one that he had a few years ago. And has made something of a name for himself in the post-Daily Show days as sort of the brown Jon Stewart / John Oliver type, right? Like his...
Right.
And that's not me identifying him in that way. That is the way that the culture has sort of latched onto him, was that he was an important representative of the South Asian community, the Indians, the Indian Muslims as well.
Yeah.
He's an Indian guy who's also a Muslim. And a lot of his comedy, so-called, has been focused on his experience of being a young teenager, in the wake of 9/11. I think he's a couple years younger than we are.
Yeah, but around the same age group as
about
us,
the same age, yeah.
Right, and actually, up until this article came out, and maybe even beyond, based on how people are reacting to the story, he's on the short list for permanent host of the Daily Show, which still exists somehow, and it's on Comedy Central, which
I
still
thought
exists
Trevor
somehow.
Noah, because Trevor Noah announced that he was leaving
he
a while
announced
ago,
he was
right?
leaving some time ago, and they were just kind of doing a rotation of guests, and they give you like a week-long stint. They would just throw anybody in there. Chelsea Handler, Hasan Minhaj, other people would. I think Sarah Silverman did 1 week, so just to kind of see who would be the fit, and I think they said he was one of the people that they were considering.
What happened to him?
All right, so there was an article that came out of the New Yorker last Wednesday or Thursday, I believe. Maybe even later, maybe it was Friday, I don't know, whatever. Last week, an article came out in the New Yorker. Go ahead and spend your free New Yorker of the month article on it.
I'll tell you to tell me about it.
Yeah, we will. But it's absolutely worth reading. Essentially, this reporter had attempted to fact-check some of the stories that he had told in his stand-up and was unable to verify a lot of the relevant information. And this was not just limited to things that he had said in his stand-up, but ways that he had talked about these experiences to reporters afterwards, reporters who decided that it wasn't worth the effort of checking those facts. So it's just to get
checking
this,
the facts by going to the source. Is it true, Hasan? Yes. Just right.
So just to get this part out of the way up front, which is the dumbest possible response, and I think misses the entire point here, which is that people are saying, and Whoopi Goldberg had this take. She's the most famous person who took this position publicly, but this has been the position of a lot of people in comment sections and on Twitter that I've seen as a reaction to this story, which is, you fucking dummies. You thought that the stand-up comic got up there and just told the truth about themselves and just told stories as they actually happened? Do you really think that when a comic gets on stage and says, so I was in the coffee shop this morning, that they were literally
right
at the coffee shop this morning and had this hilarious anecdote happen, rather than the obvious fact that they've been
Louis C.K. has talked about that too.
They've been
in general,
right? They've been honing this act hundreds of times over the course of the last 2 or 3 years until they get it exactly right. What are you, a dummy? Did you think that every time a stand-up comic went on stage to tell a story that was supposed to be the gospel truth about something that actually happened?
Right.
And no, I don't think anybody. I don't think anybody actually thinks that. But I think if you tell a story about how you opened some hate mail from a fan, or not a fan, but an anti-fan, someone who hates you,
a hater,
an anti-fan.
And in the opening,
is that how Antifa started?
I think so. Yeah, in the opening of the letter, you spray what you believe to have been anthrax onto your toddler child, right? You open this, you're just opening in the kitchen. I'm Hasan, and I'm opening the mail.
Yeah.
And I threw anthrax onto my daughter, and we rushed to the hospital because I thought I had anthraxed my daughter, and it turned out that she was fine, so you don't have to worry about it because it wasn't actually anthrax. It was just some unidentified white powder. Right. And then you go on to talk about that not only in your stand-up show but also in interviews elsewhere, with actual people, not just an audience.
Right, in a different setting where it's not like a set up punchline. They're some other media outlet is talking about it.
Right. To say, and we'll get to this, but to say nothing of the fact that there never was a punchline. Like
right.
this.
And that's the problem. You know, like you had brought up Whoopi Goldberg, but she's not the only one. This has kind of like been, I mean, this is not scientific, but just the general reaction has been service level, no shit. Everything a comedian says is in service of a joke, of the punchline, right? Which generally is true, but it's not true in specific cases such as this one. I think the example that I brought up, and there's countless others you can point to, but like there's another comedian, Tig Notaro, and she was diagnosed with some sort of cancer, and it happened that week. And you know, these comedians are always going up on stage practicing. So at her next, open mic or whatever these people do, she opened with like, "Hey, I'm happy to be here. I have cancer," and she just kind of went right into the joke. She tried to make light of it and talk about her anxieties and all that stuff, but kind of make it like funny in a storytelling kind of way. Like if that turned out to be just, "Oh, are you kidding me? I didn't have cancer. I was just saying I had cancer," people will react to it much differently than if Dave Chappelle's punchline to like seeing a baby in a strip club, like, "Oh, there wasn't actually no baby in a strip club. That was just a joke." I mean, obviously that's a joke, right? I mean, there seems to be like a deliberate misreading of what happened to reach that conclusion that it's just a joke, right? Because like you say, it was kind of like setting up the world to make some other point. It wasn't even like a joke. Like, what's the punchline to?
He doesn't tell jokes. Like, you watch his stand-up, he doesn't exactly tell jokes. He tells stories that are inflected with his particular brand of humor, which is mostly just like every once in a while he yells something ridiculous and jumps up and down on stage.
He's got that frenetic energy and the hand gestures, and like he does a whole like. The way he kind of does things, I could see how people would find it funny. And he'll pepper in a joke or two.
I understand that he's an amusing character to watch do his shtick, but to me it doesn't particularly appeal because I don't like. There's no joke there. Oftentimes it seems with him that there's just something we're supposed to laugh at his audacity and the fact that like he also presents himself as like supremely in control. Like he's very much like hair slick back. Like there's just something like very used car salesman about him to me that I don't trust him in the first place. And I'm sure that many think piece will tell me that is because of my inherent bias and racism. But
almost goes without saying,
To be fair, though, it's sort of borne out here, apparently, based on this interview in the last week, that I shouldn't have trusted him. But like, so there's that. Again, to make your point, there is no joke about the anthrax on his child. It's just an attempt to explain the racism of the world and his position in it. Like, it's not like there was some great hilarious joke. It was to suggest that like he's a hero for the things that he says and his family has to suffer the consequences, to the point where and it means so much to him to be able to do this and to stand up for all of the unrepresented people of the world that he like puts his marriage at risk. Like his wife is fucking furious with him because he doused his child with what he thought might be anthrax, which is a thing that didn't happen, right? Like it's just it simply didn't happen. And this is anyway, I'm going to read from the article real quick. Minhaj insisted that, though both stories were made up, they were based on quote-unquote emotional truth. The broader points he was trying to make justified concocting stories in which to deliver them. The punchline is worth the fictionalized premise, he said. But there's when he says punchline, he's not talking about a joke that makes you laugh out loud. The punchline is fucking America is a terrible place for black and brown people, and look at the ways that we suffer at the hands of white supremacy, right? The punchline is America is racist. And there's no joke
that it's having. Yeah, basically it's like the impact that it's having to him and his family is basically like the substitute for the punchline. Because basically that's the takeaway, right? Like this, and like again, he's in our age group. I mean, these jokes happen after, but like, in the aftermath of 9/11, there was that anthrax scare, there's like a period of time. So like, this is a plausible thing, like and so like to invoke that, people are going to assume, like no reasonable person would think that was part of, a punchline. Like you would just accept that as actually happening. Like, why would you question that part of his storytelling?
Right. Why would someone make up the fact that they opened a piece of mail in their house and then doused their kid with what they thought might be anthrax?
Right.
Like, why would you invent that when the underlying story is that apparently a piece of mail got sent to Netflix that Hasan Minhaj himself never actually handled, that was then opened up and a mysterious powder was inside, but like it's not clear that it was a threat. And that's not to say that no death threats ever came his way or that no violent language ever came his way. But it is certainly not the same thing as insisting that this thing happened. And then, like, to get on your high horse and to say that it's in service of some – because it's not in service of a joke. It's in service of some idea about the world that only serves to, again, to complement the moral righteousness of your own audience, which is what a lot of his audience is. It's just people sitting around aghast at the racism that Hasan has experienced as a brown man in the world and effectively complimenting themselves for not being a party to that racism. This is a guy who built his entire first special around a story that he tells about a girl that he dated in high school who, when he showed up to take her to the prom, he gets to the front door, knocks on the door, and the family comes to the door. And I'll just actually, I have the clip pulled up, so I'm just going to play that here.
Ding dong. Mrs. Reed opens the door. She has this look of concern on her face. And I look over her shoulder. I see this dude, Jeff Burke, putting a corsage on Bethany's wrist. And she's like, oh my God, honey, did Bethany not tell you? Oh, sweetie, we love you. We think you're great, and we love that you come over and study. But, tonight's one of those nights where, we have a lot of family back home in Nebraska, and we're going to be taking a lot of photos tonight. So we don't think it'd be a good fit. Do you need a ride home? Mr. Reed can give you a ride home. And I was like, no, I have my bike. I just biked back home and I played Mario Kart the rest of the night. And that's the nicest I've ever been dressed playing Mario Kart.
So is implicating that his high school girlfriend had a family who was full of such unconscionable racists that he would show up for the prom at her doorstep, ready to go, knock on the door, and have mom say, you can't come in and take our daughter to prom because we're going to put these pictures on Facebook or something in 2003. Like, I'm not sure exactly what the problem was going to be with the taking of the pictures in the imagination here.
Right.
Of the mom who doesn't actually exist, or who does exist but didn't actually do this awful thing to this human being. These lies that you're telling about these actual human beings who, by the way, you made it supremely easy to identify in real life who these people were when you put their vaguely blurred out pictures on the screen in the age of social media. Is that worth the punchline that I was wearing my tuxedo while playing Mario Kart? Like, that's if what we're expected to believe is that in service of the punchline is I was well dressed while playing Mario Kart, that's a very not that good of a joke. That doesn't seem the old is the juice worth the squeeze on that one in terms of the joke? Well, no, of course not, because the punchline is not that you giggle at the fact that he was wearing a bow tie while playing Mario Kart. The punchline is America is this awful racist place that when a good-hearted kid who is good enough to help your daughter get through math class or chemistry class or whatever and to be a friend, but not good enough to be her date to the prom. That's the punchline, right. Is that America is this awful place, and aren't we all so enlightened here as we sit in the audience or sit at home watching on Netflix? Aren't we better than those people? That's the punchline, and that's the only way that you can say that this is in service of some punchline. It's certainly not in service of any comedy, which puts a lie to the whole thing that Whoopi Goldberg was saying.
Right, and that crowd reaction is basically, like, instead of thinking of it as stand-up comedy, like almost kind of like a magic act, the big reveal is not that he was playing Mario Kart with fancy clothes. The big reveal is this racism that we all know exists. Like, I lived it. Like, it happened to me, and it happened in this way. Like, that's the big punchline. So like that has to be true, right? Like, because otherwise, you're right, the whole thing falls apart. That is a very weird way to get to the joke, because you can get to I played Mario Kart with a fancy clothes so many different ways.
Well, it's like that weird, like Hannah Gatsby thing. It's like this weird not comedy thing that's happening.
Right, but at least with her, so her example would be like if all of the stuff that she was going through was, I'm just saying that just for the Netflix special. Like,
yeah, but like, what's stopping them from telling? Like, if comedians are allowed to stand up and tell like not really true stories as true stories for comedy, what's the difference between that and telling not really, but kind of maybe based on true things stories for not comedy?
Because when Seinfeld or Louis C.K. or whoever gets up there and does it, they're not fucking my moral betters. They're not up there telling me how much better they are than I am, or than their audience is, or than some huge percentage of the people in the country are, right? That we're not being lectured in that same way. Louis C.K.'s act, or any of these, most of these other successful comics' acts, are successful because they tear themselves down. Because it's a psychological reflection or investigation of themselves, right? And in so doing, the really good ones, like when Louis C.K. was at his absolute best before all the masturbation stuff came out, he could dissemble his personality in such a way that it told a story about the country or about the human condition in a way that you wouldn't otherwise necessarily have access to. That's the opposite of what's happening here.
Yeah, but
this is
maybe
just
it's
pure
a different
self-aggrandizement and pure self-righteousness packaged in a way that first, like, it's not funny. Like that's whatever.
But
that's a matter of taste to some extent.
Maybe it's just a different kind of art form that we don't like.
Right, but I think like there is, and maybe you're right, Laura. Maybe what does it matter at the end? But like I always thought, like you have these two different types of. I mean, there's more than two, but like you have the setup punchline, just what most people think of stand-up comedy, like Louis C.K. Dave Chappelle does a little storytelling, but there's also this other wing where it's almost like a one-man show peppering in jokes, right? But overall, it's a story you're telling. And so when that story is not true, it kind of undermines the whole structure. Like another example would be Birbiglia. Like it didn't even have to be something serious like anthrax. Like if he was lying about like sleepwalking, like to me, it would just be like, this doesn't track. Like, why would you concoct this very specific and particular story just for the couple of jokes you throw in there? I mean, the interesting part is the story and that it actually happened to you. That's like the strength of storytelling in this case, is because this actually happened and you have a way to kind of your funny way of looking at things or your pointed way of looking at things is like something that people want to hear. And if that is like, oh, I was just kind of like cobbling, one little thing that was true.
It's also absurd to say that he's not trading on the idea that people will believe him.
Yes.
That is simply that's a fucking lie. If you like when you get up there and you tell that story in the way that you're telling it and you go full black on the stage except for the one spotlight, right? Like all the lights come down and you have the camera come right up to your face and you do the confessional thing that he's doing there. That is he's daring you to call him a fucking liar, right? It's a provocation to say, oh, you don't believe me? Like, I'm going to stand right here and I'm going to say these words right to the screen. How dare you suggest that this is not an experience of mine? That's what that is. And if somebody had called him a liar, they would have been derided as a racist and thrown out of the building, right? Like, because, like, what do you mean? Why wouldn't you believe? Like, he's getting up there and he's saying this thing. Of course this happened to him. Believe all women. Believe black and brown people, right? Like, just whatever. It's the self-righteousness of the I'm just doing comedy here and it's in service of the punchline, at the same time that anybody who questioned him about that story, I think in that moment, now years later, where he thinks that he can skate by or whatever, like, I don't know, there's something disgusting about it, and there's this notion of it's emotionally true or emotional truths. These are things that we allow only the people that we agree with to get away with, right? This is not a feature of one particular way of thinking in the world or not. This is just a fact of sort of the human condition, which is that we will allow the people that we like to tell lies about the world if they tell lies about the world in a way that either flatters us or comports with the things that we already believe. Like, yeah, you might be telling a lie about this, but it's true enough. And that goes for the Donald Trumps of the world who tell absurd lies about the world, but speaks to some greater emotional truth or psychological truth in the people who think that he's basically telling the truth even as he tells these lies. And I'm sure that there are people who say, I don't fucking care that this didn't happen to Hasan Minhaj because white supremacy reigns supreme, and this is the experience of some brown people somewhere, and it is wrong of you to denigrate him or tear him down. He's telling a truth that matters in the minds of many, many people, and that's fine for you, I guess. I'm never going to trust him again. I don't know why anyone else would either.
Are you surprised that? Because this surprised me. Are you surprised that Hasan, when the questions came in from the reporter and they said I'm doing a story and would you be willing to answer some of my questions, that instead of trying to be defensive, he just kind of leaned in with the yes, of course, I cobbled these things up. Like, are you surprised that not only did he take that approach, but also he knew the reaction would be, who cares? Comedians make up stories all the time. Because if I were him, I would just think, oh, shit, I'm going to get in trouble. This is going to set me back some, 6 months or a year, or at least I'm going to lose my job at The Daily Show. But, he didn't think any of that, and he was right. Are you surprised by that?
No, because he's the right – he fits in with the right – he's accepted in the crowd. So, if you're part of the tribe, you can do effectively no wrong as long as you continue to preach that which the tribe already agrees with, right? It doesn't surprise me in the least. To me, the fact that he tells this story about a real identifiable human being, and it's simply not true, right? It's just simply not the case. And then that person goes on to experience, has a supremely negative experience of being in the world as a result of this, right? People come after her. People are upset at her and her family for being such awful racist shitheads when it just never happened. And you justify that, because there are people who are bad in the world, that it's okay that this person had the ire of Hasan Minhaj's fans turned against them. It's just fucking gross. Because it's so counter to the way that I want to present myself in the world. Even on the extremely small scale of this podcast, I rebel against telling lies about how I'm thinking or feeling or about my experience. Sometimes do I say something that is slightly more exaggerated, and Lori gives me shit about it because it's not exactly, it doesn't comport exactly with what happened. Yeah, that happens, but it's on a continuum of being the truth. At least it's in the same fucking ballpark, right? And I wanted to connect it to the Jann Wenner thing. Did you see the interview that the founder of Rolling Stone did with the New York Times Magazine? It came out. This one came out, I think, on Friday.
This is the one where blacks and women are not so smart?
That is the very uncharitable way.
No, that was the philosophers. That was the philosophers and Bob.
Okay. Right. Jann Wenner defends his legacy and his generations, the co-founder of Rolling Stone magazine, on the legacy of boomers and why he chose only white men for his book on rock's masters. Now, if you want to talk about a person displaying their own emotional truth, Jann Wenner absolutely does that. This is a guy, and in a way that I think we should welcome in our society rather than try to condemn. And this is a deeply, and I recognize this is a deeply unpopular and out of step take.
Why? What is so great about this expression of his? Which I find kind of ridiculous. But what is the upside for people saying whatever is crawling through their minds?
So to be clear, what he said, and I'll read a quote here. And actually, they have the audio, and if I can find it, I'm just going to play it. Actually, before I play the clip, sorry, David Marchese, who's the guy who did this interview, we've talked about interviews that he's done before. He gets good ones every once in a while. He asks him about the UVA rape case article, which was a big deal when we first moved here, because he was in charge of Rolling Stone at that. So I don't know if we've explained this fully. This is the guy who co-founded Rolling Stone magazine, and in his capacity there also helped found the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and has maintained a great deal of editorial control at Rolling Stone for much of its entire existence, apparently even after he sold it to some fucking publishing company back in 2017. But also, he was there when the Jackie story at UVA came out, which is a...
Is that the one where they had to retract?
Yeah,
that's why we decided to move here.
The UVA campus rape story is the one where this girl, codenamed Jackie, said that she was gang raped at a fraternity, and it turned out to be
someone else's story.
Is this
completely made up.
The one that
it was
Hunting
someone
Ground,
else's story.
Some sort of, or is that a different article?
Yes.
Okay.
So he asks him, like, did your editorial judgment in sort of pursuit of the literary merit of these sorts of stories, did that get you in trouble? He says, quote, "The University of Virginia story was not a failure of intent or an attempt to be loose with the facts. You get beyond the factual errors that sank that story, and it was really about the issue of rape and how it affects women on campus, their lack of rights." In other words, it wasn't literally true, but it was truthy in a way that I want to continue to defend, right? Which is like, and that's what truthiness is.
Bob,
like,
could you just do the listeners a favor? Can you just read that next sentence?
Other than this one key fact that the rape described actually was a fabrication of this woman, the rest of the story was bulletproof.
Okay, so, okay.
You like that?
Other than like the most important integral part of the story not being true, the rest of it holds up. Why not just say, yeah, we screwed that up. It didn't meet our standard. You know, there's so many. You don't have to like throw the person completely under the bus, but you can massage it, the apology. But this is just ridiculous. What do you mean? Big picture story that was fully retracted? I mean, like, or that was retracted?
Well, I mean, I don't want to defend whatever this is, but like, if you have to tell something that's not true in order to shine the light on bad shit that happens so that it affects actual change, like, it's not where's the lie, but like what...
What if the change that Jann Wenner and Rolling Stone affected was the turning of these tribunals that they have on campus from fact-finding missions to kangaroo courts where people aren't even allowed to confront their accusers, and the Obama administration writes a series of memos, a Dear Colleague letter that says, we will revoke the federal funding to your university unless you come up with a new method of determining the evidence in sexual assault cases where all you need is a sort of feeling that this is something that is more likely to have happened than not in order to punish the individual and to kick them out of college.
All right, I don't know. Whatever.
What if the result of that is rather than less sexual assaults happening on campus, instead it's a profoundly negative impact on a bunch of people who are falsely accused of sexual assault on campus? I mean, whatever. Like, I don't know. I don't know what the ultimate consequences are of him publishing a story that was a lie. What I know is that you cannot know them, and it is better instead than to tell the truth.
And also, it doesn't matter what story you're doing. I mean, you're striving to tell the truth, and if you didn't get something right, just say it. Don't try to, like, make some sort of weird connection to, like, well, these things do happen. Of course, all of the things happen, right? But, like, you said a thing, it didn't track. Just say we got it wrong, and we'll be sure to not make the same mistakes going forward. I mean, it's not that difficult.
All right. They then move on to this book that he's putting out this year called The Masters, and this is conversations with Bono, Bob Dylan, Jerry Garcia, Mick Jagger, John Lennon, Bruce Springsteen, and Pete Townsend. all of which were conducted in his capacity as an editor or the editor of Rolling Stone, except for the Springsteen one, which I believe was done strictly for the purposes of this book. And you'll notice about that list of names that I read that they are all legendary rock and rollers who are also happen to be white men, right? And so David Marchese says, this is a history will speak kind of question. There are 7 subjects in the new book, 7 white guys. In the introduction, you acknowledge that performers of color and women performers are just not in your zeitgeist.
I think is the phrase
which, to
you
my
use.
mind, is not plausible for Jann Wenner.
To my mind, is not plausible for Jann Wenner to say Janis Joplin, Joni Mitchell, Stevie Nicks, Stevie Wonder. The list keeps going. Not in your zeitgeist. What do you think is the deeper explanation for why you interviewed the subjects you interviewed and not other subjects?
Well, let me just, I get
Carole King, Madonna. I mean, there's a million examples.
Okay. When I was referring to the zeitgeist, I was referring to black performers, not to the female performers. Okay. So just to get that accurate. In terms of the female performer, I mean, the selection was not a deliberate selection. It was kind of intuitive over the years. It just fell together that way, So I interviewed, the people I interviewed had to meet a couple of criteria. It wasn't just kind of my personal interest and love of them, But having to do with, insofar as the women, I mean, there were just none of them were as articulate enough on this intellectual level.
Oh, stop it. You can't say that. You're telling me Joni Mitchell is not articulate enough on an intellectual? What do you mean?
No. Hold on a second.
I'll let you rephrase that.
All right, thank you. None of them, I thought, could get to the. I mean, Joni Mitchell, yes. I mean, let me just say, it's not that they're not creative geniuses. It's not that they're inarticulate, although. Go have a deep conversation with Grace Slick or Janice. Please be my guest. Or Cass Elliot, wonderful person. Joni was not a philosopher of rock and roll. She didn't, in my mind, meet that test. Not by her work, not by other interviews she did. The people I interviewed were the kind of philosophers of rock, of black artists. I mean, Stevie Wonder, incredibly, they're genius, right? These are genius artists. I mean, I suppose when you use a word as broad as the Masters, the fault is using that word, but maybe Marvin Gaye. I could cut Curtis Mayfield they just didn't articulate at that level,
Well, but how do you know if you didn't give them a chance to?
Because I read interviews with them. I listen to their music. I know you can intuit from the music and the lyrics they write, the kind of things they're writing about. I mean, look at what Townsend was writing about, or Jagger was writing, or any of them were writing about, and they were kind of deep things about a particular generation, a particular spirit, and a particular attitude about rock and roll. Not that the others weren't either, but these were the ones who could really articulate.
Don't you think it's actually more to do with your own interests as a fan and a listener than anything particular to the artists that you're talking to? I think the problem is when you start saying things like they or, these artists can't. Really, it's a reflection of what you're interested in more than any ability or inability on the part of these artists, isn't it?
That was my number one thing. The selection was intuitive. It was what I was interested in. Yeah, absolutely. And still, who would you have me interview today you think could articulate the philosophy of rock and these times in that way? For public relations sake, maybe I should have gone and found one black and one woman artist to include here that didn't measure up to that same historical standards, just to avert this kind of criticism, which, I get it. I knew I had a chance to do that. And maybe I'm old fashioned. And I wish in retrospect I could have interviewed Marvin Gaye, maybe have been the guy, maybe Otis Redding, had he lived, been the guy,
You interviewed Hendrix back in the day, didn't you?
Yeah, did you want me to put that in?
No, I'm asking. But my next question was, how was that? How was that interview?
Well, it was in the first year of Rolling Stone, so I was considerably a newbie at that point. Secondly, I went over to those hotel room. We got completely loaded. together. And I came back to the office with a couple hours of tape, and it was kind of reassembled it into something readable, and it was published. So I looked at it again to see if there was something off, and it was interesting, but it wasn't, the kind of deep dive that I'd done with all these other people. And to me, it had to be a deep dive at that level. And these were the smartest guys in the room. Both as this group of kind of white middle-class guys versus black guys versus women, and they each kind of had different burdens to deal with, and shaped their articulation of rock and music and what they wrote to those burdens. The ones in this book are the ones that I shared that burden with.
All right, I will stop it there. Apologies for the length of the clip, but I think it was worth playing. Obviously, he says things that on the surface, and really, even no matter how much you attempt to massage them, one could argue are bad, and that were obviously going to upset some people, and in fact immediately did, to the point where there was an emergency meeting of the board of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, where in 20 very short minutes they decided all but unanimously, with just Jann Wenner and one other guy voting not to get rid of him, to kick him off of the board of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, in the interest of protecting the brand, no doubt, to say nothing of the whatever sort of moral weight you might put behind that sort of an act, I suppose. Would you like to articulate any preemptive anger at my defense of what's kind of like? What is your what is your reaction to what he said there? In that,
as an immigrant,
which hat am I wearing now? The first thing that jumped at me is, I know this is just like an interview for the sake of like the print edition, right? So like he doesn't have to be articulate when he's speaking to the journalist, but I just do find it funny that like the strength of his argument was that these people were articulate, and he's getting in deep shit for his lack of articulateness, because like that's going to have to be his explanation when he does his mea culpa, right? To say, I did not express what I intended in the most articulate way. I didn't mean that, black artists and women artists are dum-dums, and like Jagger and Bono are these smart philosophers. Like it came out wrong, or these are just my favorite artists and they're alive. So like, and by the way, it's too reductive to say that they're white. I mean, that's one thing they have in common, but also they're great artists, blah, 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 right? So like he's going to have to like eat the inarticulate charge to kind of get out of this. And I think that's kind of amusing in this situation. Beyond that, I don't know where he lands. I mean, is he, because like the further he kept on digging himself into a deeper hole, right? Because the reporter was actually trying to kind of save him a bit. Like, I mean, to me, it reads like just these are your favorite people, and like he could have just ended there. Like that's what I meant. I'm sorry. And he could have just said some bullshit like this is not all inclusive. I'll have another volume 2 of the Masters or whatever, and I'm sure that'll include some other people. But like he just kept on going back into like I could have just given lip service to one black and a woman just for PR reasons, but fuck that. Like so like he just kind of, I don't know how you come back from that last part. Like that part is like the only reason why I would ever include a black person or a woman in the future would have to be because I got so much shit when I did it the other way, right? Like so it's kind of hard to believe in future iterations of the Masters or whatever the fuck he wrote about.
The question of relevance here, I think, is whether or not Jann Wenner is correct in his assessment that
careful.
Yes, careful. Also, I think that speaks to Abe's criticism about Wenner's performance in this interview, which is that the reason that in large part he's not articulate is because of this obvious you should be careful here thing that is going on, right?
Like
there's an
by the way, what's the point of
no? And then yeah. To be fair, he then largely was not careful, but that's how you are an iconoclast who runs fucking Rolling Stone for 50 years, right? Like that's it's by being the person that you are and not by being fucking particularly careful. Right. But whatever. I think that you have to consider the possibility that he is right about the narrow thing that he is saying, which is, I don't think that he's saying that black folks and women cannot be geniuses in their own right. But in the narrow way that he's defining what interests him about rock and roll, or about the philosophy of rock and roll, those people don't speak to it in a way that he can identify with, or at least he never had that opportunity based on things that he read in that they would say, or the way that they presented themselves as artists. Like there's an element of this that to me is there's only a certain kind of person who takes rock and roll as seriously as Jann Wenner does, right? Like, there's a privilege to some extent in being able to take rock and roll that seriously. It's sort of like the way that Chuck Klosterman examines pop culture, right? Like the sort of utter seriousness with which you take these things can lead you to only, I mean, I'm not, ironically or appropriately, I'm having trouble articulating this in a way that makes any sense at the moment. But I think that it is entirely likely that it is true that only these assholes like John Lennon and Mick Jagger and Bob Dylan, like it makes sense to me that Jann Wenner would believe that only these dudes were the ones who took this stuff as seriously as he did. And that does speak directly to David Marchese's question, which is like, this is just the artists that you like, right? Like these are just your favorite artists. But yeah, the thing that he likes about them is particular to these people in a way that I think is actually kind of fair, right? The self-seriousness, this belief that you can actually like have meaningful social and world-changing effects on the world is the domain of a certain kind of person, right? That you could take your stupid art and your silly little rock and roll songs and have an impact on the whole world is sort of the domain of the obnoxious white guy, right? Like that's what we excel at to a certain extent. Is this notion of self-aggrandizement based on the fucking bullshit that you think is cool, right? Like so because Mick Jagger thinks that the bullshit that he thinks is cool can change the world, and Jann Wenner agrees with him, like it doesn't surprise me that the guy from In Living Color, the black rock and roll band from the late 80s and early 90s, doesn't have that same sort of feeling about rock and roll that Bob Dylan does.
Or like fucking Bono.
Or fucking Bono, right. Like these are people who fully believe in the transformative power of a 3-minute rock song to change the face of the planet. Who else has the privilege of believing that sort of thing besides...
the fact that you said privilege, like that's what it is.
So it's not exactly a defense of Jann Wenner, which is why I didn't want to present it as a defense of Jann Wenner, who I think has a very sort of narrow understanding of the world and in a way that is a problem. But what it is it's incredibly revealing of one of the primary cultural gatekeepers of the last 40 years of pop culture, or even longer than that at this point, of the last 60 years of pop culture. Right. This guy has made it easier to understand the world that we've lived in since 1967, or since he was born in 1946, by explaining the way that he sees the world to us, and to decide that because he was honest in that way and given us a greater understanding of the way the world has been for the last 60 or 70 years, that he must be thrown out of the culture at this point, that he must be done away with, that he no longer has a place in it, strikes me as the wrong sort of move.
Right. I think the second part, this discarding thing, I'm not for either. But it does seem like people kind of treat it as like this limb wound that you just need to just kind of cut off to kind of save the host. So like the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, like we're gonna get flack because of your bullshit left leg. Fuck off. chop, and then you can just move on, right? And so I think the calculation
Who gives a shit about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame?
But I think if they kept him on, if they just, took the Bob approach, come on, water under the bridge, you said something stupid. But, they'll just get all the flack, so they're just kind of throwing him under the bus. But so I do want to make one point, because, to me, there were so many opportunities for him to not fuck it up. And he screwed it up at every opportunity. Because, for starters, he accepted the premise that he let race factor into his final 7, right? Because the way the question was asked, what do these people have in common? They're white, right? And maybe that's the first thing people would think of. Although, if you showed me the list of that, I mean, I know Bono is white, but to me, Bono is just like Bono. He's not white. But you would, if you poll people, they would, for word association, it wouldn't always be the first thing white, maybe man or something else, whatever it is. Not only did he accept the premise that race played a role in his selection, but he leaned into.
So I don't think that he accepts the premise. I think
he doesn't accept the premise because he kind of goes into, well, maybe some black person that does whatever. They're not at that intellectual. He went knee deep.
He doesn't say that they're not at the I don't think that he. So I don't want to defend him.
The part of the show where you start screaming.
Right, but what he's doing here is he is saying that he did not encounter a black or a female rock and roll artist who took rock and roll to be as serious as he did, who took the philosophical underpinnings of it, who took what he believed about rock and roll in this with the same degree of seriousness that people like Bono and Mick Jagger did. I don't think he doesn't say it at all gracefully, right? He doesn't say it at all. He's just saying, had there been someone who did take it this seriously. Instead, I got fucking wasted with Jimi Hendrix, and we didn't even get around to talking about it, and now he's dead, so it's not like I can have a great conversation with him. But maybe if I sat down with Marvin Gaye, and under the right circumstances, we would have shared a certain understanding of the importance of rock and roll and the philosophical underpinnings of it, and he would be in the book. But he isn't, because I never had that opportunity, or I never took that opportunity.
He does sort of quickly say women aren't as articulate.
Right. I thought I read something along those lines. But again, at every point, he's still going through with the premise being valid. Because, is he, because if I'm reading the article, I'm thinking that he is filtering out, he's made some sort of judgment about black artists and women artists, that they're not at that level, right? So he's almost filtering them out. He's kind of telling you that there's a prejudice that he has. His worldview is that, at least in my experience, I've never come across a black artist or a female artist that is at the level of Bono, of this philosopher, right? And so, he's doing some sort of math. He's accepting the premise. He's doing some sort of math to saying black people, black artists and female artists, they make great music and all that, but they're not at the level that I'm looking for the master's list or whatever, right? So basically now that means that you are taking that into consideration. Instead of just rejecting it outright, saying, I looked at every artist, and these 7 is who I came up with, that they're all men and that they're all white. Maybe there's some prejudice that I'm not recognizing, but that's not what I went into it thinking. I just looked at all the artists, and I came up with these 7, and let that be that.
Right. The problem is that the selection was done over the course of many decades at this point. This is not a series of interviews that he's conducted in the last 18 months. This is a series of interviews that he did for the magazine for the last 50 years, right? And so, there's no doubt in my mind that it's possible that some fundamental prejudice that prevented him from taking seriously female artists went into the fact that he never had an interesting 3.5-hour-long conversation with a woman who shared his his belief in the philosophical import of fucking rock and roll. But also, I think it's incredibly likely that those people actually don't exist.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think but I think he also doesn't know that.
No, I think
but
he might not.
should.
He might not know it. He might not have given himself the chance to be exposed to it. But I think that there's a reasonable chance that Imagine a bunch of kids playing with Legos in the dorkiest fucking way imaginable, and they every day they go to the Lego table and they play fucking Lord of the Rings Lego, and it's this weird like mystical magical fantasy land, and it's just the four fucking nerds in the fifth grade class, and they're all doing the same thing every day, and they take it incredibly seriously, and then you take one of those kids out of the group and you ask him, why don't you play with any of the girls in the class? It's like, well, because none of the girls take our nerd shit nearly this seriously. It's like, well, have you ever given them the chance? I don't know. We never told them not to. We never told them not to show up, but they show up and they hang out at the Lego table for 20 minutes, and they are clearly not as invested in our fantasy Lord of the Rings bullshit as anybody else is.
Because they have other shit to worry about.
Right. You're a fucking nerd. You can do whatever you want to do. You're not wrong exactly that they don't care, and there's a certain amount, like I was trying to say earlier, there's a certain amount of privilege.
It's the privilege
in being able to play in this stupid fucking sandbox and pretend like it's the most important fucking thing in the world. When sorry that Janis Joplin has broader concerns, as it turns out, or that black artists have broader concerns, and that they don't think, with good reason, by the way, that rock and roll is going to fundamentally change human nature or the way that we organize ourselves in a society, maybe because they're living a little bit closer to reality than you are, Jann Wenner. But the only defense that I have here is that it's interesting that this is the position of someone who has been one of the primary cultural gatekeepers of the culture for my entire life, certainly, and also that I'm not sure that he's wrong on the underlying premise. Not that like somehow blacks and women aren't articulate or that they're not geniuses in their own right, but that maybe in the very peculiar way that he imagines a genius to be about rock and roll, there might not be any who meet that criteria.
But the fact that you can realize that about him in, I don't know, a day. I don't know how long you've been thinking about this, but he doesn't realize that about himself is the discrimination and the racism and whatever that everyone is talking about all the time.
Yeah, it speaks to the blindness that living your emotional truth can give you if you're not careful or if you can't recognize it yourself, right?
But this is all just self-inflicted. Like, I think, because, like, again, like, that you have 7 artists, like, that somebody makes a connection that they're white, that should not mean anything. I mean, there are many explanations for that, right? But I guess that raised this issue for this reporter. His response was, like, so bad that he kind of almost, like, confirmed the suspicion that I would not have had. Like, I would not have made the connection, like, oh, this guy's doing some sort of race thing or whatever, right? But, like, or a male thing. But when he kept on going about, well, come on, name me one that could be at that level, that kind of tips your hand. Like, to me, like, that's kind of like...
Okay, but if you cannot give him one, then
no, you
what
should
are we
not.
talking about
don't make
here?
something up. And to his credit, he said, like, yeah, I guess I could have just done that just to kind of keep up appearances. But the problem is that he is, by his answers, suggesting that, like, there's something significant about an artist that a woman, like, they can't reach that level, or black artists can't reach that level.
I mean, maybe.
Right.
Also, who takes himself more seriously than fucking Madonna? Like, that's Pete Townsend? Bono? Fuck off.
His responses did not help his cause, that he did not let those things factor in.
Madonna is not I don't think plays into that list in the way that, I mean, that's the thing. When you set up the terms of the conversation in the way that he has, I don't think that he's wrong. And that's what he's simply describing the world as it is. That is revelatory of, I think, rock and roll in a way that is interesting and meaningful, and is much more interesting and meaningful than whatever sort of personal biases might be going on in this dude's head. I get it. I understand the upset, and I certainly understand why the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame feels that they have to cast him out. But I want you to go and Google up all of the great name all of the women who belong in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame who aren't there yet. And you know what you get? You get a bunch of country music and pop artists. You get a bunch of not rock and rollers. who belong in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and that's fine. Like halls of fame are fucking stupid.
Like, who cares?
Right? Nobody fucking cares. But if you're gonna have a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and then you're like, you know what, fucking Patsy Cline and Dolly Parton probably need to be in it. It's like, well, then I don't know what the conversation is that we're really having here anymore, because those people don't do rock and roll.
But the main thing is that, no matter what the makeup of the artist currently in the Hall of Fame, like whatever the breakdown is, I don't know what it is. I'm sure it's male heavy, white heavy.
It's like 90% male. Yeah.
So like you can live with that, right? Basically just saying, we looked at the artist and the music and the catalog and blah blah blah, and these are the people, and it just broke that way. We'll have to live with it, right? That's fine. You can live with that. But if you draw conclusions from the makeup of the Hall of Fame, and that kind of reinforces your worldview, that be 90% or whatever the number is, that must mean that there's a ceiling that the other demographics butt up against, and they can't get beyond that. And that's why it's 90%.
No. I think the problem, absolutely, the problem is if you assign a value judgment, as Jann Wenner no doubt does, to the pursuit to like some sort of the superior intellectual pursuit of rock and roll, and you say, no, I don't think women are capable of doing it. I don't think that it's not clear to me that that's what he's saying, but I think that speaks to, again, I mean, I don't want to have to say it 3 fucking times, but I think it speaks to the reality of the situation in an interesting way, which is that this is a pursuit of a certain type of person who is in the world in a certain kind of way, who tends to have this sort of identity. Should I play a quick Strassman?
No. It's late. We're going to talk about movies and football. Like, we don't have time for Strassman. Wait till next week. Or are you going to be a bad husband? Yeah.
I'm going to be a bad husband.
Yeah.
You can't set me up like that and then expect me not to just immediately drop in.
Although maybe now you're tipping your hand. It must be a good one if you wouldn't trot out like some bullshit.
Abe, you better take notes because there's like 3.
Indigo, a largely forgotten crop, once was one of the South's most profitable exports, and it's making a comeback. CBS's Mark Strassman reports how indigo is bringing together the country's past and present.
Sheena Myers makes her indigo soap, knowing nothing can scrub away South Carolina's past.
There's a whole history behind what I'm doing.
It's deep.
Yeah, it's real deep.
Indigo dye's beautiful color comes shrubbed and shrouded by an ugly history. In the mid-1700s, wealthy South Carolina planters called it blue gold, a labor-intensive cash crop produced by the sweat of enslaved people. For Myers, it's personal.
Very personal.
But to you, it's not just anybody's history.
Right.
This is
It's my family history.
Among those enslaved indigo workers, her great-great-grandmother.
Because they were humiliated, now I'm being honored. And me being honored is like I'm honoring them as well. I don't think they would ever have thought in a million years that they would have a descendant creating things like this.
Her company, Genotype, sells indigo-based skincare and medicinal products for psoriasis, peptic ulcers, bronchitis. Annual sales top $1 million.
immerse it.
Immerse it down in.
Down the road, Precious Jennings grows indigo to process its natural dye powder. Think of it as farm to fabric, digging for healing in the dirt of a former plantation.
Every day I come onto this land, I honor and think about and give gratitude to the people that were here and enslaved on this land.
Myers wants to pass her business and family history to her 3 sons.
If they keep this business alive, it won't disappear.
Keep growing the indigo. The history stays alive.
It will continue. It will continue.
Growing a new indigo legacy, rich in humility. For Eye on America, Mark Strassman, Charleston, South Carolina.
Abe, did CBS News' senior national news correspondent in Charleston, South Carolina, get off a good one?
Yes, he did. Actually, that was quite enjoyable. Like, Mark Strassman's back,
Strassman gets off a good one.
I don't know if they give out Emmys for newscasts.
No, your show is the only one
Emmys
that cares.
for a minute 57 long or less news hits.
Didn't Alec Baldwin win like a Best Supporting whatever for like 7 minutes of like Glengarry Glenn Ross? It's that kind of powerful performance.
This is peak Strassman trying to narrate a certain series of lines into the story where he's sitting there and he's throwing the line out to the woman who's sitting there on the bench with him and slowly reeling her back in, trying to get her to say the right thing like 3 different times. It's a classic of the genre of make sure you get a lot of coverage of me reacting amiably to the person that I'm interviewing. Right? There's multiple cutbacks of Strasser just having the time of his life, nodding along and smiling. We get Nothing Can Scrub Away South Carolina's Past. We get Indigo is shrubbed and shrouded by South Carolina's history. I don't know what it means to be shrubbed by history. I'm not
means
sure.
You're shrubbed.
What are we
like
talking
you're
about?
buried in shrubs.
And digging for healing in the dirt of a former plantation.
Like next time I don't like something, I'm going to say shrub that thing. And you will.
I disagree, Abe. I don't think that Strassman got off a good one. He got off a
series. Fabric? I mean, come on, this guy's just.
Farm to Fabric.
Farm to Fabric was good.
What a great talent.
You've been listening to Cast Iron Brains, a podcast with Bob Nabe. Find the show on places. Head on over to brainiron.com or castironbrains.com. It's the same place for a show note. You can also send us an email, brainironpodcast@gmail.com, as did listener Steve at the request of Lori last week. Or maybe I said it. I was like,
I didn't request anything of anyone.
Lori insisted that we don't have any listeners. And I said, well, if you're listening, send us an email. And Steve obliged. He said, I'm listening. And I don't think I responded to Steve. But if I were going
You're a bad friend and cousin.
Respond to Steve, I would have said, Steve, that's great. There's no accounting for taste, is there?
Also, you're responding now.
That's right. I don't know what anybody's doing listening to this.
Hey, the PTO people that skipped the intervening 90 minutes.
Yeah, good thing you missed all that. Don't read the episode description because we definitely didn't talk about that stuff.
That's right.
Abe, did you make it to the movies this week?
I did. So I went to go see A Haunting in Venice, and as I usually do with movies I didn't care for too much, I will just say it was fine. Like, these whodunit kind of Agatha Christie kind of movies, like this. Like, I think
it's one of those.
This is the latest Kenneth Branagh as Hercule Poirot.
Right.
Doing
this one
the
was like they
detective
kind of like injected some like horror, or at least in the trailer, it didn't read the same way as the other ones did, but like
it looks like a supernatural thriller more than a murder mystery.
But basically, it's the same beats as all the other movies.
Scooby-Doo.
This person did it.
Not as good as the other two that have come before.
It's probably better than the one with Gal Gadot with her.
Better than Death on the Nile. All right.
Yeah, better than that. Yeah, not as good as the first one, whatever that was. Orient Express or whatever it was. So on Saturday, there weren't any other movies for me to watch, but I did go to a live stand-up comedy show at the Fox Theater here in Atlanta, and this was SNL's Michael Che and Colin Jost, like basically, and
together.
And it wasn't clear, to that point, it wasn't clear to us. Like a friend of mine, like a few weeks ago, like, hey, I got an extra ticket on Saturday, then whatever, and I'm like, yeah, I'll come and watch. But like initially, it's just Colin Jost and Michael Che. So you're thinking, are they going to try to do some like SNL Weekend Update kind of thing? Like what's going on? It wasn't clear like what was happening. I assumed that they were going to just do their, I'll do my stand-up for like 40 minutes. You do your stand-up for 40 minutes, and then we'll come together at the end. They had an opening stand-up. So it kind of worked that way. Basically, they had like a opening act who was also an SNL member. I've never heard of this person, like a brand new person. I forgot his name already, like some young kid who's like the latest in the SNL group.
Right.
And at the very end, they did come together, but it wasn't formal. They're just kind of just shooting the shit. So there was no like actual Weekend Update style comedy, right? It was just like Michael Che stand-up and Colin Jost stand-up. And it was fine. They are part of that group of people who insist that you have to put your phones and smart watch on a pouch, and then
Oh,
they
so
lock it.
no recording is even possible. Yeah.
Right, so there's no recording. They didn't even want you to use your phone for the ticket, so we had to print it out. Basically, it's like kind of going back in time. So like for like 3 hours, it was kind of like, no phone stuff. What was interesting was that the show started like at 7, so we had to get there like at 6:15, 6:30. This is on Saturday. I'm thinking Georgia will make quick work of South Carolina, and I'll go because there'll be like, information void for 3 hours, right? So like, I was like, there's no way it was going to be a close enough game to where like I want to know going into the Fox like what the score is. But they pulled away, so it wasn't an issue. But it was kind of trending that way, where like South Carolina was winning. And
Yeah, they were up big at the half, right?
Yeah,
14
it
to
was
3.
It was like 5-something. I was like, holy shit, I'm going to go to see the show, and the fucking Cox may win. That didn't happen. But the show was, funny. It was almost sold out. It appeared to be sold out. Like, there's no empty seat anywhere. I didn't know that they had that kind of pull.
That's impressive. You fill the fabulous Fox Theater just based off of your weekend update thing. That's impressive.
Yeah, and also like their material wasn't like, what's the nice way to put it? Like it wasn't like fully polished. Like there were a couple of jokes where it looked like they kind of worked this out because it was a solid joke. The setup, the punch, everything kind of worked. And then others are just kind of just like, I don't know, like Trump. What do you guys think? Just kind of
working through new
audience.
material. Here's what they were doing.
Which I was like, come on, this is too big of a venue for that. Like usually you do that at the smaller venues, but whatever. Entertaining evening. Paying $20 for beer wasn't fun, but it was
$20 for a beer?
It was like 18 or something. It was some ridiculous price.
God.
And it was like a fucking line. It was like a line for everything. It's kind of like that part wasn't fun, but the show was a lot of fun.
Well, that's good. We what did we do? We watched football.
We watched football. That was it.
That's pretty much it.
I mean, Friday, we watched Indiana Jones 2.
That's right. We watched Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom with the children.
Highly problematic. Don't watch it.
Okay.
It's pretty great. It's not as bad as I remember thinking that it was. I enjoyed it more this time than I have in the past.
Then we watched fucking baseball.
Yeah, we watched some baseball. The Braves clinched the division, I think number 6 in a row, and then proceeded to lose like 5 games in a row.
Oh, we watched your favorite romance reality show. I gave you the option of watching the Johnny Manziel documentary. Stop talking. I said I want to watch the Johnny Manziel documentary, or what's the fucking show?
Shit or Get Off the Pot.
The Ultimatum.
Ultimatum season 2.
The third season of The Ultimatum.
Season 3, Jesus.
We skipped the one with the gays.
Yeah.
Because
of our preconceived biases.
Bob chose the reality show about wife swapping over the documentary about quarterbacks.
That is a completely unfair way.
Literally, that's what happened. I said I want to watch the Johnny Manziel thing or the quarterback thing.
I had been punished for weeks in a row watching fucking the Florida documentary.
Meanwhile, I can't find my favorite line from the Florida documentary to write down because it's so good, about Tebow saying, and then that guy, which his name I forget, drank too much Gatorade, so he was cramping. Like the way he subtle, the subtle, beautiful judgment of this friend of his from 15 years ago. Just drank too much Gatorade, so he was cramping up.
Only a true and long practiced
to find exactly what it was.
Evangelical Christian can judge in the precise way that Tim Tebow judged his teammate for drinking too much Gatorade.
Good.
Anyway, it's fucking Friday night. I just recently finally finished watching the garbage Tim Tebow and Florida Gator documentary, and Lori's like, well, we can watch the Johnny Manziel version of that exact thing, or we can watch Nick Lachey and his wife torture these people who've decided that they would rather have their fucking faces on television than retain any shred of dignity,
or break up or get married,
any regard to their future selves. And I was like, all right, we can laugh at these fucking awful people for an hour. That'll be fine.
And we did.
Yeah.
See, a little change of
pace. And then
pace.
we watched football on Saturday, and I was so tired, I couldn't stay up and watch the Colorado game.
Same.
I was so mad.
it was like the highest rated. Once again, this Colorado team is doing
My
big
TV
business.
was watching it. I was asleep.
Yeah, I think I passed out on the couch at like midnight or so, or shortly before midnight, around halftime of that game, and woke up the next morning, Sunday morning, very upset that Colorado had come back because
the build up to that game, I guess the coach said something disparaging about Dion, and like they're like favored by a lot, and so when they were down, I was like, they need to have like a dedicated Dion cam. The rest of I just wanted to see him.
They don't
come
need
to the realization of like, I'm going to eat shit after all that talk about, we're going to show them, we're going to put them in their place, we're going to beat them up. You made it personal.
They're going to lose this week.
Colorado State had all the juice. There was a bogus pick six that, like, all because of a penalty on a successful field goal is the only reason that the pick six even ends up happening. Like they should have been up like 24-3 or 24-7 at the half, not just 21-14 that they were. And then Colorado comes back and wins it. Like, it is imperative on a number of different fronts that Oregon and USC fucking dump truck Colorado in the next few weeks. Like, right. I think those are either their next two opponents or two out of their next three opponents.
Yeah. And also, but the thing is, it's like they now have a ready-made excuse. First of all, they weren't expected to beat those two teams because they're better than, like, more so than like TCU and Nebraska and Colorado State. And also, like, because of that hit that happened to probably their best player, right? That Travis Hunter guy.
Well, Shedeur Sanders is really
he's good, but like the other guy was like playing on both sides of the ball. Like, he seems to be like really good. Like, he's just everywhere. And so, like, without the services of him for the next 2 weeks, they were going to lose even with him. But now they can just say, we were short, one of our best players. Let them have
an excuse.
And then, so, like, the expectation is going to be baked into what happens. And if they upset one of the two, which I don't think is going to happen, because their defense.
No, USC is going to. USC is going to do. It's going to be like 65-40 or something. It's going to be an insane game. I think.
Is Bo Nix still playing football? Is he the quarterback for Oregon?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, so that schmuck is going to get a nice little victory.
Yeah, he should.
I don't know. He tends to not do well in big games.
Yeah. Speaking of not doing great in big games, Georgia had their first SEC.
We didn't have a big game
test, and it was ugly in that first half. But they came back, and whatever Kirby does in that locker room, this was not so much the case last year, but 2 years ago, when this team, the team from the first title run, had like. I never went back and compiled it, but their third quarters, I swear to God, were the greatest third quarters in the history of football. Like, whatever was happening in the first half of those games didn't fucking matter, because in 21, that team would come out in the third quarter and just fucking eat souls. And that's what it looked like. We didn't see a lot of that last year, but that's what it looked like in the South Carolina game. They came out of halftime and just fucking killed, and it was a lot of fun.
I think they're still real fucked from that kid dying.
Oh, yeah, I think there's a lot of. So at the same time, and you can't control this sort of thing, so it's a crazy thing to sort of say. But if you're Kirby smart, and what you want is to really reinforce the belief in these idiot 20 and 22-year-old kids' heads that they haven't accomplished anything yet, despite the fact that they've won 2 national titles the last 2 years.
Bad play calling in the first half.
Then what you do is you have these first 3 weeks. Like, if what you want to do is to make these kids hungry and to have to prove themselves moving forward, then you hope for these sort of middling to not that great performances that they've done in the first 3 weeks of the season, so that you can instill in them this notion that you're not fucking shit yet, and you still have to prove yourselves. And it's crazy to think that that's what's actually going on, that like he's sabotaging the team in some way.
I refuse to believe anything else.
That is,
I refuse. Given what they do when they're good, I don't believe that it's not somewhat intentional or weird Kirby mind control stuff.
Or it's like it's purposefully self-sabotaging or something. Like, somehow his freak underlying animal nature knows, like, we can't be too good, so I'm gonna suck, and Bobo's gonna suck for the first few weeks, and then we're gonna turn it around when it really matters.
even the first few weeks, they can suck.
Also, my dad
for
was
the
giving
first
me
half of all of these games.
my dad was giving me shit for all of the shit that I talked about Stetson Bennett
Yeah,
last
I don't
year.
appreciate when you talk shit about Stetson Bennett, especially right now.
I'm not
and
talking
I don't know
any
if
shit
he's okay.
about Stetson Bennett. I'm sure Stetson is going to be fine in the long run. But I still think that, like, while Carson Beck has not been great, he has not been bad in the particular way that Stetson Bennett was so consistently bad over the last couple of years.
But
I like that Kirby in press conferences now is like, oh, you're going to question my quarterback choices? Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see. Okay, well, we've won 2.
The thing about this Carson Beck guy, like, yeah, he didn't have the downsides of a Stetson, but he has no upside of anybody. He's just like this, like, lifeless, just like, I'm here. He's accurate at the throws he can make, but, like, there's nothing there. It just seems like he's just like
he's fine. Stetson Bennett was so fucking charming and enjoyable that anyone following him is going to feel like there's nothing there.
Carson Beck has the dead eyes and affect of
male model
of Zoolander extra. Yeah.
Very male model.
Somebody in the background. He looks like Kate Moss. He is if Kate Moss.
Very male model.
If Kate Moss were a college quarterback, it would be Carson Beck. It has that sort of the dead.
Seriously, do a Google image search for male model, and it's just like Carson Beck face.
And
these
every time
weird alien faces.
Every time they transition to the commercial, they always have like a graphic with that face of his and like some of the other players, but it's always like funny. He just has that face, just like almost looking stuff.
Really looks like there's nothing going on back there. Just
probably isn't.
Lights are
but
on,
that's the
but no
thing.
one's
When you're used to Stetson Bennett with his just effortless, laid back charm thing, like you can't follow it with anyone except a total asshole or somebody very boring.
One thing that I Googled in my rage this week about the Chick-fil-A / your jokes don't translate for the Afghan refugees situation is I Googled, is Chick-fil-A halal? Can you put all of these different aspects of the things that you're mad about together in a single Google search? And it turns out I could. And it was, is Chick-fil-A halal? Largely it's not. Unfortunately for my Muslim brothers and sisters out there, Chick-fil-A is haram. So you got to stay away.
No reasonable Muslim. You know, I'm well aware of the Muslim world. No one really honors what that person just said. People eat Chick-fil-A.
So nobody bothers.
No, that's ridiculous. I mean, you know, there's always occasionally somebody argues that gelatin is like some sort of pork product, and they don't eat like whatever's in that. But everything else, yeah, Chick-fil-A. I mean, my folks eat Chick-fil-A all the time.
Well, I guess I'll see them in hell then. Abe, have you got anything else for us tonight?
Nope.
I guess that's all we've got for tonight then, and we will talk to you next time.
Later. Getting some like spam text or actual text from actual people?
I mean, I assume that it's spam, but I have one from a 626 area code that just says hi. I got one earlier today from a 458 number that says, hi, Charles. May a hello bring you a new mood. May a blessing bring you a new beginning. What are your plans for today?
That's nice. That's not spam.
Who the fuck is Charles? And what sort of a beginning to a conversation is that?
You know, now that you mention it, I get those texts so frequently that it didn't even register when you were going through yours just now. But I get a lot of those where it's just a lot of like, hey, it's a new number. And it's like, they say, like, here's a link or something. Like, you know, like, instead of just building up the scheme, they just can't wait.
Right.
And they just open with the scam. It's like, you know, if you just open with, like, because my memory shit. If you just said, like, hey, this is any name here,
right.
you know, like.
Hey, it's Nathan. You owe me $25 from the bar the other night. This is my Venmo. Abe's like, all right.
Not again.
Probably.
It seems like there's like no sophistication with these things. If you just play it a little, people are like, I guess I owe you money. Sure.
Some fucking asshole in my phone is Jerry Burris. Says, "Is this Georgia quarterback no good?" And that was 3 days ago, and I haven't responded. What a jerk I am. The problem is that if I don't see the text, like when the conversation is going on, because he's responding to
Jerry, he doesn't respond to my texts either. If it makes you feel any better,
he's reacting to something happening in
Right.
real time. I didn't see that he texted me in that moment. And then, so what, like 6 hours later, as I'm watching Colorado State, Colorado, I'm going to be like, give a discursive opinion on what I think about the new Georgia quarterback? No.
he leaves mine as though he's not read them as well. So, like, did you read Jerry's?
Sometimes I have not read them.
Yeah, you should read the text messages your wife sends and your friend Jerry.
You are right in the larger sense that there are certain texts that are sent in like sports context where like there's no real need to respond to this. It would related to something that just happened.
Right. Send Abe like 22 texts in a row, but he's out at the bar not paying attention to his phone. I don't expect him to like individually go through and be like, yeah, I remember that play before the end of the first half, and that was bullshit. What the fuck was Bobo thinking?
But
like,
is
that would
this
be,
Georgia
that would be insanity.
quarterback good or not?
I know,
is a reasonable text.
Yeah, it is.
It's not time sensitive. You're just a bad friend.
Yeah,
and
sure.
And not a best husband sometimes.
I believe I answered all your texts today. Do I need to pull that up?
You did great today. I felt loved.
I got, there's a couple of unread ones there. But that was the end of the conversation. I saw it and I swiped it away.
Don't swipe it away!
I didn't need to respond to that.
You're swiping your wife away.
The proceeding was created with 100% human content.